Trump just chose Pete Hegseth as his Secretary of Defense. Yeah.
Oh my God, you're serious?
Yes, yes. Let's start with Gaetz, who will serve as Trump's Attorney General. Let me just say that again. Matt Gaetz was tapped to serve as Donald Trump's Attorney General.
And if you're skeptical of us, oh, you guys are left-wingers, etc., no, Trump's gonna be anti-war. This is the guy he picked for his national security advisor. Watch this.
Until you're prepared to commit your grandchildren, not your children, but your grandchildren to stand shoulder to shoulder with my grandchildren and fight Islamic extremism, then you will never be successful here.
Trump just chose Pete Hegseth as his Secretary of Defense. Yeah.
Oh my God, you're serious?
Yes, yes.
That is unbelievable. Is
this the fall of the American empire?
So is the head of Health and Human Services going to be Keith Ablow? Remember the?
Don't give him any ideas, Jake.
He used to be the lead doctor. He was for Fox News. He was on their medical aid team, and then later it turned out he had women tied up in a basement.
I'm gonna go ahead and read their announcement verbatim, okay? So this is from Trump Vance. Statement from President Donald J. Trump. I am honored to announce that I have nominated Pete Hegseth to serve in my cabinet as the Secretary of Defense. Pete has spent his entire life as a warrior for the troops and for the country. Pete is tough, smart, and a true believer in America first. Is he? With Pete at the helm, America's enemies are on notice. Our military will be great again. There's more, but.
Okay, so Pete Hegseth is the guy who, it's one of the funniest segments when he they were outside right in New York, right outside of Fox Studios, and they decided to do an axe throwing contest in the middle of a busy New York street, and he threw it over the target and hit one of the guys that were playing in the band behind them for Fox News. Nearly murdered someone with an axe. We got an axe for. Okay.
Sounds like a great Secretary of Defense.
But look, guys, I mean, look, I got, now because we're the fairest show in America, I have a little bit of mixed feelings about it.
Do you?
Okay, here's why. Look, first of all.
Because you're hoping that you as a media figure might be tapped for an.
Hold on, I'm getting to that. No, not me, not me. Hold on. No, listen to my point. So, look, guys. Pete Hegseth, we'll look into his track record. I can't believe it. It just happened while we were live. And so my guess is we'll find out that he said things just like Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, and who's the National Security Advisor, Secretary of State for Rubio, and Elise Stefanik, and that he is a huge advocate of Israel being able to start more wars and us paying for them. That's my guess. We'll find out, okay? My guess is he's a huge war hawk. And while pretending to be anti-war, but maybe I'm wrong, and we'll see.
Yeah, look, we don't know.
We don't know yet. Yeah. We don't know yet, and we'll get you guys the information. Okay, that's my guess. All right, now the thing that I was going to say is, guys, here's a small piece of credit. For Democrats, they always got, okay, who's the corporate politician we should put into all of these roles? Oh, you get a lot of money from the train industry. Buttigieg, you go to Department of Transportation. Okay, you get a lot of money from the oil companies. You go to Department of Energy or whatever it might be, right? And that's how the Democrats handle it. And they get, oh, bravo, bravo. You got all the corrupt politicians and staffed your administration. Here, he's going off the board, obviously, picking Pete Hegseth, way off the board, right? Or off that target with the axe flying above it, okay? But imagine the Democrats like caring enough about their base, their media, their voters, that they go off the board. And so the equivalent, hold on, the equivalent would be if Kamala Harris won and was like, for my new Secretary of Defense, I'm picking John Iadarola, host of the Damage Report.
No, that would be great. That'd be great. So look, it'd be great because John would do anything and everything possible to not go to war, right?
Yeah, you want an anti-war Secretary of State, pick John Iadarola.
Okay, but look, I want to be fair to Hegseth. I don't know much about him, so while it's an out of left field pick, I'm reading stuff about him. He's a decorated Army combat vet. Like he's got.
I know that, and he's got a great education.
So let's pause and we'll do a full story on it. I just wanted to tell you that there's breaking news on this.
I got you, but at the same time, I've seen Pete Hegseth for the last decade or so on Fox News.
Yeah, he's a conservative.
Yeah, no, I know. We've covered him dozens of times.
Yes.
And he's a bit of a blockhead at a bare minimum, and that's already baked in, right? The only question is he an anti-war blockhead or a pro-war blockhead? And that's what we'll investigate, and we'll give you the facts on it tomorrow. But you see my point about, hey, at least he's willing to go off the board.
Yes,
and he cares about his base.
He's not some military general that the standard military generals that have never met a war that they didn't love.
Right, and the Democrats would never go outside of Washington, would never go populist, would never appease their base. So it's an ironic piece of credit to Trump.
Let's hold on that.
Yeah, until we find out his record, and then we'll come back tomorrow and give you the discredit if he deserved it.
Right, all right, but for now, let's take a break.
All right, back here reading your comments from TYT.com. Purple Orchid said, regarding Noam not having any qualifications or experience, Trump doesn't care. He has no qualifications or experience, and he never let that stop him. I know, but you know what? That's the same thing I was saying about Hegseth. All these people who have political experience don't impress me at all. So I actually viewed it as a negative, to be honest, than a positive. Somebody, Republican or Democrat, says, oh, this person spent the last 30 years in Washington. I think, oh, no, please no. Kasich says, Cenk and Anna, I honestly have lost all hope. The oligarchs and the nationalist American Taliban have all our politicians in their pockets. Our government of all branches are just puppets. I don't see their stronghold loosening anytime soon. See, that's the only part that I disagree with is the last sentence, because I do see it loosening. I see a populist movement that is beginning to challenge the orthodoxy that I've lived under my whole life in American media, and American media has done nothing but wall-to-wall propaganda, and that the wall of propaganda is breaking, and it's breaking significantly. I know a lot of you guys are not seeing it, but it's our job to see these things first. That's why we catch so much grief when we say things ahead of time. We're kind of like Bruno. We didn't make it happen. We're telling you what's going to happen. But in this case, I think I know that populism on the right can go very, very wrong. We're not letting our guard down for 1 second, okay? But I think a lot of people are missing the upsides of the populism, because I know the devil we had with the establishment, and that was never gonna get better, and that was the hopelessness that you're feeling. So let's see what happens in 2028. And the establishment Democrats lost very badly this time around. So they're as wounded as they can be. They'll regroup, they'll get another $1 billion, etc. But we're gonna regroup too. Just sign the populist plank on tyt.com/. Actually, you can just go to the homepage, tyt.com, and let's build up our army, political army.
Donald Trump's wild ride of cabinet nominations has continued today, with both Congressman Matt Gaetz and former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard landing spots within his administration. So let's start with Gaetz, who will serve as Trump's Attorney General. Let me just say that again. Matt Gaetz was tapped to serve as Donald Trump's Attorney General, okay? And Gabbard will serve as the Director of National Intelligence. So when it comes to Gaetz, Trump issued a pretty long statement on what he hopes Gaetz will accomplish in his new position. Matt will end weaponized government, protect our borders, dismantle criminal organizations, and restore Americans' badly shattered faith and confidence in the Justice Department. Matt will root out systemic corruption at the DOJ and return the department to its true mission of fighting crime and upholding our democracy and Constitution. Now, hours before the announcement, Matt Gaetz posted something on X that's worth bringing up here. He said, "We ought to have full court press against this weaponized government that has been turned against our people." I don't know if the former president amounts to the people, but that's what he's referring to here. And if that means abolishing every one of the 3-letter agencies from the FBI to the ATF, I'm ready to get going. Okay. Look, I don't know what Gaetz is really gonna do. Should he get confirmed? Should he actually be this country's future attorney general? I would just warn him. I would just warn him about the fact that, as he's targeting these spy agencies, which I, for the most part, have no real love for. We've also made a lot of enemies on the international stage thanks to the fact that we're aiding and abetting the slaughter of countless Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanese individuals in Lebanon, Beirut. I mean, we might want to be careful in cutting down our spy agencies entirely out of the fact that you have a gripe with them because they went after your daddy. I'm just saying. Now, you probably know by now that Gaetz is being investigated, or at least was being investigated, by the very same department that he will now be the head of should he be confirmed. The Department of Justice investigated the congressman for sex trafficking and obstruction of justice allegations, but ultimately they decided against charging him. We don't really have any clarity as to why that happened. And Gaetz, by the way, is still under investigation by the House Ethics Committee. Gaetz's position as Attorney General now gives him the authority to investigate and prosecute Donald Trump's enemies, including his own, if he chooses to do so. On the campaign trail, by the way, Trump has threatened to investigate Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and the prosecutors of his 4 criminal cases. And so time will tell whether Gaetz is going to carry out, Donald Trump's dirty deeds, like if he's gonna spend his time, focusing on the wrong things, or if he might tap into some of his intuitions and maybe do some of the good things that he's wanted to do in Congress. So I wanna be fair, because Matt Gaetz, while I'm urged to freak out about this, has done a few good things. And so I want to give you an excerpt from a piece written by Lee Fong, and I'm very happy he wrote this because I had forgotten about some of the things that Matt Gaetz had done during his time, or has been doing during his time in the House. His record speaks for itself. From his perch on the House Judiciary Committee, Gaetz has promoted a surprisingly consumer-friendly agenda, routinely breaking with his GOP colleagues on crucial votes. He previously supported legislative measures to break up Silicon Valley monopolies, sharply regulate the online data broker industry, something that I'm very in favor of, ban non-compete employment contracts, and an end to the practice of forced arbitration, among other corporate accountability votes. So let's be fair to Gaetz. I mean, I know that we're all bracing for impact and we're all expecting the worst. And I think generally speaking, that's probably the best mindset to have. But we should also be fair and acknowledge that there were good things that were pursued by Gaetz during his time in the House. And if he decides to tap into that side of him as AG, should he get confirmed, he might actually make history in a good way. So let's see what he ends up doing, and more importantly, let's see if he actually ends up getting confirmed. Already, Susan Collins, Republican senator, became the first Republican senator to oppose Gaetz's nomination for the position, and we'll see if others join her. But what we do know, without a shadow of a doubt, is that this would be a critical role in Trump's administration, in any administration. So JD Vance, in fact, said just last month, the most important person in government, I think, after the president for this cycle is going to be the Attorney General. Yeah, I think he's right about that. So we'll see how this plays out. As we mentioned earlier, Donald Trump made another big announcement today. He has selected Tulsi Gabbard, former Democratic Congresswoman, as his Director of National Intelligence. Now, in that role, she would have quite a responsibility. She would oversee 18 separate spy agencies. I think we might have too many spy agencies. We might, just saying. She would also assemble the president's daily brief, which is an intelligence summary given to the president every morning. Now look, there were all sorts of reports in his first administration about how uninterested he was in these daily briefings. I'll give you a little taste from the New York Times. In his first administration, Trump did not often read the written summary, but he held in-person intelligence briefings, often twice a week or more, engaging his briefers on world affairs, at least on topics that interested him. Okay, that's good. I mean, at least he did that. So we'll see how things play out in his second term. Now, since the 2020 primaries, Gabbard has made a full 180 to the right. She started off on the left as a Democrat, then she transitioned to an independent, and now she is a Republican and Trump loyalist. She served in the military, so she does have some military experience, although she has minimal intelligence experience. Now, in the aftermath of the election, Gabbard stated that Trump's victory signals a rebuke of neoconservative war hawks, which is hilarious because that is not the case based on some of the Defense Department appointments he has already made. I mean, Marco Rubio is definitely a neocon, and he will be serving in the Trump administration in the State Department. And let's learn a little bit more about what we can expect with Trump's new cabinet.
When the result of this election, we saw, of course, a vast majority of Americans placing their trust and confidence in President Trump, delivering a mandate and rejecting Kamala Harris's agenda of open borders, of censorship, of free speech, of freedom of religion, of crime in our communities, her agenda of continuing to wage stupid, costly, and unnecessary wars that are counterproductive to the interests of the American people, and instead embraced President Trump's vision and promise, rejecting the neocons and warmongers of Washington, promising to end wars and prevent World War III and nuclear war.
Interesting. Okay, what I love about Tulsi Gabbard, one of my favorite things about her is even with that monotone delivery, she somehow manages to convince people that she actually believes what she's saying and that she's presenting herself authentically. Anyone, doesn't matter what side of the aisle you fall on, you should never take anything any public figure says at face value, that's for sure. But especially Tulsi Gabbard, because she tends to present herself one way, and then you do a little bit of digging and you find out, oh wait, who she really is actually completely different from what she's presenting. And so she presents herself as, a peace-loving individual, someone who doesn't want to engage in forever wars. Although she was definitely supportive of the war on terror. And not too long ago even said that she is against regime change wars, but was supportive of the war on terror. Okay. And I remember doing a deep dive on Tulsi Gabbard. After the deep dive, she refused to allow me to interview her, even though she was scheduled for an interview with me and Cenk involved. So here's a little taste of the segment that she didn't like.
It would be misleading and unfair to my audience if I pretended there weren't some concerns for progressives. Most of the worries I personally have center on Tulsi's foreign policy views. While she's clear in her disdain for military intervention in the name of regime change, she is supportive of the war against terror. Think about how many interventions the US has found itself in since the Bush administration, all in the name of fighting terrorism, right? So I'm not just talking about Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm talking about major military operations in Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen, right? These were all done in the name of fighting terror. There have also been US-led coalition airstrikes in Mali, Syria, Libya, and West African airstrikes in Nigeria. Have those military actions ended global terrorism? Of course not. Tulsi's hawkishness toward terror has led her to support military actions I, along with many other progressives, disagree with. Torture tactics like waterboarding, which were given the euphemism of enhanced interrogations, was something that Tulsi was supportive of.
So look, I don't know how Tulsi plans to carry out her job. I don't know if she even has a say in regard to Donald Trump's foreign policy, or if she can convince him to engage or disengage with a potential conflict. What I do know is that I don't trust her. And what I also know is that you look at Donald Trump's coalition of voters and it's mixed. There's certainly some Republican voters who probably agree with the hawkishness represented by the neocons and to some extent someone like Tulsi Gabbard. But what gives me a little bit of hope for this country's future and its foreign policy is that much like a faction on the left, there is a faction on the right that is serious about no longer engaging in these endless wars, no longer wasting our resources in being the international police. And I hope that their voices are loud enough to drown out the neocons within their ranks, because we can't keep going on with all these interventions, spending hundreds of billions of dollars, making more and more enemies on the international stage. It would be a complete and utter disaster. And more importantly, there are two potential hot wars that we should keep an eye out for. One having to do with an invasion in Iran. That's the one I'm most concerned about. That's the one that I think is the most likely to happen. The other has to do with China. And Donald Trump's rhetoric is certainly hawkish when it comes to China. And I don't think it's any mistake that while on one hand, you have Donald Trump and his pals talking about, cutting government waste and doing away with the administrative state, he immediately made the appointments for the State Department. So State Department appointments, good to go. Haven't heard anything about the Department of Education or any other government agency. Those aren't his priorities. I think it's concerning that his top priorities have to do with government agencies tasked with dealing with questions of war and peace. So we'll see how this all plays out, but I wanted to give you just a broad view of how his administration is shaping up.
Look, we're not gonna let him go too crazy, Elon, with the oil and gas stuff, and because Robert F. Kennedy cares more about human beings and health and the environment than anybody. And he's gonna be absolutely, having him is such a great honor. I've been friends of his for a long time. And I'm gonna let him go wild on health. I'm gonna let him go wild on the food. I'm gonna let him go wild on medicines.
Looks like Donald Trump is keeping his promise, because the president-elect is going to allow RFK Jr. to go wild on health. He has tapped RFK Jr. as the potential head of Health and Human Services, so the HHS secretary, should he be confirmed. And he made his announcement via social media, writing, quote, "I am thrilled to announce Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the US Secretary of Health and Human Services. For too long, Americans have been crushed by the industrial food complex and drug companies who have engaged in deception, misinformation, and disinformation when it comes to public health. The safety and health of all Americans is the most important role of any administration, and HHS will play a big role in helping ensure that everybody will be protected from harmful chemicals, pollutants, pesticides, pharmaceutical products, and food additives that have contributed to the overwhelming health crisis in this country. Mr. Kennedy will restore these agencies to the traditions of gold standard scientific research and beacons of transparency to end the chronic disease epidemic and to make America great and healthy again." Before we get to more on this story, I have to pause and just make a general comment about Donald Trump's social media posts. I can't say this about every post that we've been seeing from him, but I have noticed that he's kind of reining it in a little bit when it comes to, like, at least when it comes to who he announces for his, secretaries and cabinet picks.
Yeah, you mentioned this earlier in the week. I think that a staffer is writing those official ones,
yes.
Right? So that's why it appears that as a fake appearance of reining it in, that brother cannot be reined in. Okay, he'll be out in the wild very soon.
No, I totally get it, but yeah, I think it's good that he's letting a staffer write these.
I hear, but it's not gonna last. So, but on Kennedy, I have a lot of strong thoughts. So first off, I really hope they have a real hearing. And what I mean by that is, Bobby Kennedy was on the show. You should go check out that interview on Young Turks on YouTube. And it was a really interesting conversation. We agreed and disagreed in parts. And the part that I disagree with him, is the part he got put in charge of. Oops, oh well. It is what it is, that's right, we lost, they won, right? And I don't agree with him on that, but I do agree with him on a bunch of other things. I've said him 100 times, great on housing, great on corruption, etc. But what I wanna do is, I don't wanna have hearings about dead bears and brainworms and whales. Okay, we know all that, we got it, right? So I want them to have a real hearing about the substance. Like, okay, so this brother's got points about pesticides. Well, that's interesting. I kind of want to hear that one out, right?
Right.
Seed oil, vaccines, etc. Well, if you guys are all 100% sure that he's wrong, great. There's a perfect opportunity in these hearings to prove him wrong, okay? So I hope that they choose a tiny bit of substance. And I got to tell you my experience with this, because I knew him a little bit before any of this. And 9 years ago, he asked me, hey, can you arrange a debate on vaccines on the Young Turks? And I tried, and I went and looked and asked a lot of people that are scientists, etc., because I'm on their side, right? But I'd moderate, I'd be fair. I couldn't find one person, and they said, no, we refuse to discuss it. Well, now they're going to be forced to discuss it. And guys, stop saying you refuse to discuss things. If you're right, which I think you are right in this case, go make your case.
I totally agree. Now, let's talk a little bit about what he would be in charge of, like what his duties would be should he be confirmed as the HHS secretary. So this department oversees quite a bit, including the FDA, CDC, National Institutes of Health, which funds a lot of the research and development for pharmaceutical companies, Medicare and Medicare service programs, AKA many smaller agencies that fall under the umbrella of HHS. Now, since Election Day, Kennedy has pledged to take major steps to reshape the nation's public health guidelines. Last week, for instance, Kennedy said he would immediately begin studying vaccine safety and efficacy, but promised, and this is important, to not take vaccines away from anybody. He also committed to formally recommending states and municipalities remove fluoride from public water. You know, I don't know enough about the fluoride issue to comment, but I find it interesting that among those who are passionate about it, they're super passionate about getting the fluoride out of the water. So yeah, I'm curious about that.
But that's exactly what I'm talking about, Anna. Yeah. First of all, the fact that he's saying I'm not gonna take vaccines away from anybody is reassuring, because that's the extreme scenario where this is a disaster, right? So, okay, we've eliminated at least one disaster. Doesn't mean we've eliminated all the disasters, okay? But I'm looking forward to an actual national conversation, and I'm looking forward to those scientists and doctors that I believed in my whole life and still believe in to this day, going out and proving that he's wrong. But you've got to do that. You can't just stay in a cave and go, we are going to just cancel him on mainstream media. We won't allow him on anything. We won't platform him. You can't not platform the nominee for Health and Human Services Secretary, right? Right. So look, you engage, win over the country. If you're right, which I think you are, please try to win over the country to your side. And you might even win some anti-vaxxers to your side, because guess what? They've never heard your side because you keep it hidden in a cave.
Right, they just assume that we should take their word for it without having to hear, any explanation or having them provide any evidence to basically debunk some of the claims that are being made. So you make a good point there. But Cenk, I am not naive, and I know that if he gets confirmed, things could go south. But there's also a possibility that a disruptor in this government agency could be a good thing. Because honestly, when I look at the FDA, for instance, there is a lot of corruption with the FDA. And by the way, we should all be asking, why is it that we live in a country that has all these regulations supposedly, but every week you hear about a listeria outbreak in our food, you hear about E. coli outbreaks. I mean, it just goes on and on. Food being recalled all the time because of these issues. And it's because of the lack of regulations that the FDA is totally willing to provide cover for, because they've got some cozy relationships with industry as well. And so when I read about how RFK Jr. will be tasked with rooting out corruption within this government agency, that kind of rhetoric excites me. And if they actually carry that out, I mean, that could be a legendary part of Donald Trump's administration. Now, that's if things go well. Okay. Obviously, I am not naive and things could really go poorly. We'll see.
So look, as with the entire Trump administration, it could go very poorly or interestingly positive in some ways, right? So here's what I mean by that. So, and I've got it at 75% going poorly, 25% with at least a little bit of a chance that it might go well. And maybe, anyways, let me just spit it out. So the way that it goes poorly is they start saying, okay, Bobby's conclusions are the conclusions. And we're not listening to 99% of the world's scientists or doctors, et cetera. And these are now things that we're enforcing, whether you like it or not. It's kind of the equivalent of what the right wing was worried about in taking away gas stoves and burgers and planes. Now that was all overly hyped. Gas stoves is a tiny bit of truth. Plastic straws is totally true. Anyway, so that kind of stuff, we don't touch that, right? If the Trump administration does the same but opposite end of the spectrum where they go, okay, now we're doing this and you're not allowed to have vaccines, or you're not allowed to have seed oil, you're not allowed to have fluoride, et cetera, that's gonna be a holy mess. It's gonna be a giant, real, enormous problem for the health of this country, right? If on the other hand, he goes back to his roots as an environmental lawyer in holding corporations accountable, well, now we're having a conversation. Okay,
exactly, yeah.
So let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean by that. So he often talks about, and nobody ever listens to him except us, that the liability shield that vaccine companies, the drug companies have for their vaccines. I understand the logic of why they need that immunity from suits, but I also understand the logic of challenging that immunity. And I think that's a super interesting conversation, and we've never really had that conversation nationally. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm not quite sure which side I'm gonna come out on, right? And I can't wait for the scientists to emerge out of their cave and actually make their point of view on this. And then the FDA, and Anna's right, we live under corporate rule. There's nonstop like food poisoning and et cetera. Is Bobby going to be allowed to rein them in? Or is Trump gonna say, oh, no, those are our donors, shut up. You get back to your seed oils, okay? You're not allowed to touch corporate rule. If that happens, well, that exposes Trump to some degree.
Of course, yeah.
Right, and I'm gonna come back to why I have a little bit of faith in RFK Jr. Hold for that thought. But the last one, and there's many others, but my God, imagine if he said, and they're gonna say this is a little bit outside of his scope because this one's nuclear, but what if he said, you know what, as the head of HHS, I think we should negotiate drug prices, all drug prices. I think we have to, it's a health emergency, okay? Now that is the mother lode of corporate rule. They are the big, pharma is the biggest lobby in the country, and way bigger than AIPAC, way bigger than oil, than anything else. And they have us under their thumb, and they won't let us negotiate drug prices. They're robbing us blind. My God, if RFK Jr. does that, he walks away. He walks away at Kennedy in the lexicon of American politics. Now, I'm perfectly aware that he can go in the other direction. I just told you there's a 75% chance they go in the wrong direction. But if he goes in that direction, now we're having an entirely different conversation.
I gotta say, I know how much Trump supporters like to own the libs, like they live for it, and I get it. But can you imagine the ultimate owning the libs that the Trump administration could do? Because Biden desperately wanted people to believe that he was FDR 2.0. Can you imagine if Trump actually carries out the types of policies that would lead to people calling him FDR 2.0?
Are you kidding me? That's my entire plan.
That would be the ultimate own. Oh my God.
So guys, look, go check out the Populist Plank and sign that pledge on tyt.com. We'll have the link in the description box. One of the 6 things that I picked was negotiate all drug prices, okay? So, and I picked those 6 not because those are the 6 highest priorities I have. I picked those 6 because they are the ones that we all agree on. Populist left, populist right, average Americans, et cetera. They're pretty much indisputable, right? Money out of politics, anti-war, et cetera. So if Trump couldn't check off 2, 3 out of that 6, I don't care about party labels.
No, me either.
And the Democrats have been yelling at me my whole life because I don't care about party labels.
And they'll keep doing it.
Right, so No, I'm not gonna support a Democrat if they're corporate stooges and they do nothing positive. And if Trump gives you, look, again, it's not likely, okay? I know his nature, I know his instincts, right? But if he goes in the right direction, am I gonna give him credit for that? Of course! And would he be owning the libs if he stole their policies, implemented them, and then became enormously popular? Of course. I mean, what do I care if Bernie does it or Trump does it? I just or Biden does it. I'm happy to give anyone credit. Again, unlikely, but these are like so now let's get to the two advantages of Trump and RFK Jr. We've talked endlessly about Trump's disadvantages. Have I changed my mind about those? No, not at all. His disadvantages are still a mountain and a giant problem.
Let's hold on that. Can I finish the rest of the story? Because there's more details I think are worth knowing about at least. So Kennedy has also floated significant employee turnover at public health agencies. He said in an interview with MSNBC that he would cut workers in the nutrition departments at the US Food and Drug Administration. While speaking at a conference in Arizona on Saturday, Kennedy proposed replacing 600 officials at the National Institutes of Health with hand-picked staff.
That's a little scary.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's scary.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no, look guys, you replace a couple of people because you want a diversity of thought. Oh my God, you replaced 200 out of 600. Oof, I'm a little worried, right? But you get rid of everybody, you bring in everyone who agrees with you.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Then we don't have diversity of opinion. We don't have that conversation we're looking forward to.
I agree with you on that, yeah. So Kennedy also told NPR after the election that Trump gave him 3 specific things to focus on. So what are those 3 things? Well, President Trump wants the corruption and the conflicts out of the regulatory agencies. He wants to return the agencies to the gold standard, empirically based, evidence-based science and medicine that they were once famous for. And he wants to end the chronic disease epidemic with measurable impacts on the diminishment of chronic disease within 2 years. And by the way, this is an interesting and shocking move. So seeing as Trump's transition co-chair, Howard Lutnick, told Caitlin Collins just 2 weeks ago that RFK Jr. was not getting a job at the department. So let's take a look at that.
One other person who was on stage recently and was talking about coming into the administration is RFK Jr. He said that Trump has promised him control of the public health agencies, HHS, which would be also CDC, FDA, USDA, all of these agencies. Is that true? Has Trump promised him basically the HHS job?
So I spent 2.5 hours this week with Bobby Kennedy Jr. And it was the most extraordinary thing because let's face it, we've all heard on the news all sorts of sort of snarky comments about him. And I said, so tell me, how's it gonna go? And he said, why don't you just listen to me explain things? And what he explained was when he was born, we had 3 vaccines. And autism was 1 in 10,000. Now a baby's born with 76 vaccines because in 1986, they waived product liability for vaccines.
Okay,
I mean, his point is really interesting.
But
so here's what he
vaccines
said.
don't cause autism, which is what RFK pushes, which is why people are concerned that he could get a job like HHS. And I don't even think
he's not getting a job for HHS. What he's trying to do, here's what he wants to do. He said, I want data.
Looks like he might be getting a job at HHS if he gets confirmed. And by the way, now, according to CNN, Lutnick's answer set off an internal uproar in Trump's inner circle, with Trump making clear to Kennedy he'd be the one making the ultimate decisions.
Okay, yeah, so I love how cocky they are in mainstream media, and it turns out to be totally wrong. Okay, so now, the upside of Trump is twofold. One is he likes to be popular. Well, that's good news. Why don't you do popular things like paid family leave and lowering drug prices, etc., right? Now, remember, he had a first term to try to do this, and that's why I'm saying I'm skeptical. I think it's unlikely that he'll do this because he didn't do any of those popular things. He did giant corporate tax cuts. He did all these like weirdo strike back against his enemies stuff, and it just was obsessed with himself and never figured out how to be popular. And remember, he's surrounded by like the worst people on earth who all have their own different agendas. He's serving their agendas and it's making him less and less popular. So he can go down that spiral, and maybe, and likely he will go down that spiral. But there is a hope that he wants to be popular and is not going to run again, and hence will be a little bit unchained, which leads me to my second slight positive about Trump. We're no longer boxed in, guys. So now that chaos has significant danger, and that's why I was against Trump. But what sucks about corporate rule is everything was so regimented. You had to be exactly within these lines. And I never trusted the lines. And it was always some person that you never saw, oh, trust us, these are the rules, and you can't go past those rules, and you can't even have a discussion, and if you have a discussion, you're a terrible person, and we're gonna do a character assassination of you, right? So we're not boxed in anymore. And in some sense, God help us, right? Because there will be some, maybe a lot of chaos that is not positive that comes out of that. But since we're not boxed in, maybe at the end of Pandora's box is a little bit of hope. I know that's way too hopeful, right? But at the same time, it's not impossible anymore. And then the upside of RFK Jr. is at least he's not a fraud. Look, I massively disagree with him on a lot of things, and his position on Gaza is atrocious. Okay, and things that he's done in his personal life. Yeah, I definitely don't agree, but why do I care about his personal life? Why is that relevant to me? Why is that relevant to you, right? So I know we're supposed to hate him because of his personal life, but sorry, it's just not relevant to me. If I was his cousin, then maybe it's super relevant to me, but I'm not. So a lot of people in Trump's administration, I think, are frauds. I think JD Vance is a fraud. I think Tulsi Gabbard's a fraud, and I can go on. But at least RFK Jr. is not in the fraud category. You might have him in the dangerous category. You might have him in the wacky category, but I don't have him in the fraud category. That means you can have a conversation, okay?
Yeah.
And so let's see what happens.
Appeasing terrorists, concession after concession after concession. The same team that's around Biden was around Obama, that did Benghazi, that did the Bergdahl trade, that recklessly pulled us out of Iraq, that led to the ISIS caliphate and attacks around the world, including inspired attacks here in the homeland, that led to the Iran deal. And they're exercising that same playbook. You cannot appease terrorists. They understand strength, and they understand leverage, and they understand military might. And we're showing none of that right now.
The man you just heard from is quoting from the neoconservative playbook. And when you think of neoconservatives and how unpopular they are, it is curious that Donald Trump has chosen that guy, Republican Congressman Mike Waltz, as his national security advisor. Disastrous choice. Now, Representative Waltz is the definition of a war hawk. Just listening to what he said in that video makes it pretty clear. And it is much to the chagrin of all of the America First Republican voters who thought that Trump would be the pro-peace president that they were longing for. Now, just to give you a little taste of who this guy is, taste is an uncomfortable word to use in this context, but nonetheless, he is a retired Army Green Beret who served in the Middle East and Africa. So far, so good, nothing wrong with that. But he also served as former Vice President Dick Cheney's counterterrorism advisor.
Ding, ding, ding. Oh, what happened? Oh, the Cheneys are terrible. I can't believe Kamala Harris is hanging out with the Cheneys. The right wing said that? We said that. Apparently only one of us meant it. Okay, so now all of a sudden Trump brings in the Cheney staffers. I'm gonna tell you why he's bringing all these guys in. And there's gonna be a giant clash between Israel first and America first in this next 4 years. And it's gonna be super interesting. And I don't think anybody has any idea which way that collision comes out.
Look, I'm really rooting for the America First crowd, and I'm not kidding. I really mean that. Much to the chagrin of some portion of the audience, I don't care. But they are right when it comes to what they desire in regard to foreign policy. And you're right about that potential clash. So let me give you some more information on Congressman Waltz, who is going to be the national security advisor to Donald Trump. He was also a defense policy director for Defense Secretaries Donald Rumsfeld and Robert Gaetz. He voted against ending US support for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. To be fair, Donald Trump vetoed a bipartisan resolution to pull the United States out of that war. So I don't think that that would necessarily bother Donald Trump. And he also voted for keeping the Iraq war authorization on the books in 2021. Okay. He's best known for being a massive hawk when it comes to China. He's a member of the House's China Task Force and has argued that the United States is underprepared if there is a military conflict in the region. Maybe we should do what it takes to avoid military conflict in the region, but something tells me that he's thirsty as hell for one.
Oh yeah, well, the person who tells you that is Mike Waltz. He says it all the time. So there's so much more on this and the other picks, but I really want to show that Afghanistan clip because that clip shows you exactly where his head is at. And if you're skeptical of us, oh, you guys are left wingers, etc. No, Trump's going to be anti-war. This is the guy he picked for his national security advisor. Watch this.
Until you're prepared to commit your grandchildren, not your children, but your grandchildren to stand shoulder to shoulder with my grandchildren and fight Islamic extremism, then you will never be successful here. So are we 15 years in? Yes. Are we in for a lot more fighting? And do we need a long-term strategy to undermine the ideology of Islamic extremism, just like we did fascism and just like we did communism? Yes, we do. And Gordon, I think we're in for a long haul, and I think our nation's leadership needs to begin telling the American people, I'm sorry, we don't have a choice. We are 15 years into what is going to be a multi-generational war because we're talking about defeating an idea. It's easy to bomb a tank, very difficult to defeat an idea, and that's exactly what we have to do.
So guys, a multi-generational war, that was 15 years into Afghanistan. He said, forget 15 years. I need your children serving in this war. I need your grandchildren serving in this war. There's no one who is more pro-war, bigger war hawk, bigger neocon than Mike Waltz, the new national security advisor for Donald Trump. And you just saw it with your own eyes.
Yep.
So this guy is as bad as it gets. He can't wait to start a larger war. And think about how dumb he is too. Oh, this is an idea, so that's why we should be fighting a war where your kids get killed and we spend trillions of dollars to try to bomb an idea? What a moron.
Yeah, I mean, look, it is interesting because the person who got the ball rolling on the US withdrawal of Afghanistan was Donald Trump. So it is curious that Donald Trump is choosing this guy who has a thirst, a real passion to remain in Afghanistan as his national security advisor. That's insane. But he did have, some sharp criticisms toward Joe Biden for pulling the troops out. He said Waltz called on President Joe Biden to reverse course, relaunch military operations in the region, and crush the Taliban offensive by committing. Let me just stop. We were in Afghanistan for 20 years. And in those 20 years, did we crush the Taliban? Did we do that?
No, but we did crush our budget, which Mike Waltz and his corrupt buddies were super happy about because all that money went straight to the military-industrial complex as we accomplished absolutely nothing.
Insane. So basically crushed the Taliban offensive by committing American air power supported by special forces. The Florida congressman warned darkly of an Al-Qaeda 3.0 and stated that no negotiation should take place with the Taliban until the situation is stabilized militarily. Like, this guy is a complete and utter joke when it comes to foreign policy. Waltz is the kind of guy who looks at the foreign policy failures of the United States and wants to double down on them.
No, it looks like he wants to quadruple down because he's enlisting your grandchildren in a permanent war. What happened to anti-war? Come on, MAGA, what happened to anti-war? Okay, so now, but I know Anna and I are crazy, but we think there's a small percentage chance that MAGA is actually going to get mad at this and is going to challenge Trump. Okay, so let me explain why this happened and what I think might happen next, okay? So this is Team Miriam. Miriam Adelson gave $137 million to Donald Trump for this campaign. Remember, her late husband gave him $200 million in the last two campaigns. So now we're well over $300 million. So what does she get in return? She gets potentially Secretary of State Marco Rubio, huge war hawk, Israel first. Says Israel shouldn't do a ceasefire, we should have more war, and he said America should pay for all of it, okay? Then you get Mike Waltz, who's also huge neocon, huge war hawk, of course, enormously pro-Israel, and said Israel should not only continue the war, but escalate the war against Iran so that we can get dragged into it.
Disaster.
Elise Stefanik, massively pro-war, neocon, totally team Israel, thinks that, and Mike Waltz agrees, that if you protest Israel in America, if you're an American citizen protesting Israel, you should be arrested. Okay, so this is Team Miriam, and notice they're first. Why? Because Trump already made this deal. He didn't have to think it through. He promised Miriam, okay, Miriam, thank you for the bribe. And so now I'll give you all the neocons you could possibly hope for. This deal was already cast in stone. That's why they're going first.
Break your promises, Trump. You already took the money. Break your promises. You're good at that. Do it. Okay, America First is gonna love you. We're gonna come on this show, a lefty show, and give you credit. Break your promises to Miriam. Come on, be an American hero.
Yeah,
we believe in you.
Hey, do like Sheldon did. Screw Miriam.
Ew, okay.
No, seriously, guys. Okay, kidding aside, this is super important because not only is this about this enormously important issue of continuing the forever wars and honestly, Israel's forever wars.
Yeah.
I don't know what we were doing in Iraq. Iraq didn't attack us. At least Taliban was in Afghanistan, right? But Iraq had nothing to do with us, but Netanyahu demanded that we go into Iraq. That's a fact, you can go look it up, okay? So we fought that war for apparently a mix of reasons, but certainly Netanyahu wanted it. Right. He wants us to fight Iran, he wants us to pay for occupied territories, Lebanon, Syria, etc. You get it, right? So now, as Anna pointed out, there's one thing Donald Trump is terrific about, which is screwing over creditors.
Yeah.
Okay, so he always says like, oh, they're suckers, he gave me money. And it's smart business not to pay him back. That way I get to keep it, okay? So do likewise to Miriam Adelson and the Israel First crowd, because America First, look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're totally wrong and naive, it's totally possible. MAGA, all the bro podcasters, etc. might go, no, Donald Trump said it. We are now his loyal servants.
That's not what I'm seeing online.
No, I'm not seeing it either. That's why we're more hopeful than anyone else. That's why we see things ahead of other people do. But they could go in the direction of, yes, sir, of course, sir. America's second, sir. Israel will be first. We will start any war they want and pay for all of it. Here's all of my money, sir. I beg you, Donald Trump, start every war, right? They could go in that direction because let's be honest, in the first term they did. Whatever Trump said, they were like, yes, sir, of course, sir. It doesn't matter that it violates our actual core principles, sir, right? But this time around, we're sensing something that almost no one else is sensing. We've been here before, and what will happen next is everyone will tell us that we're wrong, and then they'll say, oh, you guys are terrible, etc., etc. And a year to 2 years later, everybody will say, well, everybody knew that the MAGA was gonna turn on Trump and demand America first and not come back around and say, oh yeah, didn't the Young Turks say that several years ago? So look, I don't know it for a fact at all. I'm saying there's two different paths. But if you go to TV and you listen to mainstream media, they'll tell you there's no way in the world MAGA will do that. But what we're sensing is a whole bunch of right-wing populists online who are actually American first and who actually have loyalty to that idea and to the idea of anti-war more than they have loyalty to Donald J. Trump.
So look, I'm not naive, okay? So if I didn't have an example to latch onto, I would have no hope here. But I can't help but think about Trump's first term. Trump wanted to go to war with Iran. And the only thing that stopped him, to be quite honest with you, were his supporters. His supporters did not want a war with Iran. They made that abundantly clear. And Donald Trump called off an airstrike that he had ordered on Iran. Do you remember that? And so that to me was incredibly impressive because it was a recent example of an American president who actually listened to his base. So that's why I think there is some possibility that they will have some influence on him. And based on what I've been seeing online, the America First crowd within his base do not like his cabinet picks at all. Okay, Marco Rubio is another one. We'll get to him in just a moment. But I never thought I would say that I'm hoping that America First saves this country from engaging in pointless wars abroad. But that's where we're at.
That's where we're at because mainstream media and the establishment Democrats and establishment Republicans love war. Any war, they go, oh, do we have to do it? Israel had a right to defend itself. That's why we spent trillions attacking a random country.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we know that, guys. So now I want everybody in the audience, okay, especially if you're a right winger, okay? Now go look at mainstream media and see if anybody's pointing out Team Miriam and how the first 3 picks were all massively pro-Israel and pro-war. Then go look at right-wing media and see if who's pointing out that his picks are all neocons, former Cheney staffers, etc. Right? And by the way, now I think you will find some honest shows in right-wing media, and I haven't said that in 20 years, right? But you'll also find a lot of shows covering for Donald Trump and this agenda, and then you decide who's right and who's wrong.
Right. So just a few more details about Waltz, because last month he did suggest that Israel should have struck Iran's oil and nuclear facilities. In addition to that, even before the war in Gaza, Waltz said in May of 2023 that the United States should make clear it wouldn't stop Israel from striking Iran's nuclear program, and that the US should show Iran through a variety of means that our military capabilities are such that we could indeed severely damage their program. Look, it's one thing to egg on Israel in attacking Iran in this way, but understand that for neoconservatives like Waltz, the idea is for the United States to get involved in that war. It's not just about like, oh, I'm just gonna give Israel some advice and they should do X, Y, and Z with Iran and we stay out of it. No. He very much wants the US to be dragged into a war with Iran, which would be absolutely devastating. You think Iraq was a disaster? Iran's military capabilities are much more advanced than Iraq's were. And so we did not win that war in Iraq. The idea that we would go into Iran and it would work out all hunky-dory for us is a joke, okay? American troops will die, and they will die on behalf of Israel, and they will die on behalf of the private defense contractors who very likely have been bankrolling this politician.
Not only that, there's of course the oil companies who Donald Trump is very, very fond of, and their profits would soar if there was a war in the Middle East. Iran is 4 times larger than Iraq. It would lead to massive instability and enormous gas prices. And remember, their costs would barely change. It would all be billions in extra profits for the oil companies, for the defense contractors, and for the pro-Israel crowd. So look, guys, we're gonna find out. We're gonna find out. And I mean, if it turns out MAGA saves us from Donald Trump, that would be hilarious and amazing and interesting. Again, I don't know that it's gonna happen. And so let's see how it goes. But right now, Trump is showing you his cards, and his cards are all pro-war.
As long as I serve the American people, I will defend George Washington's vision of religious pluralism and freedom. Today, this means crushing anti-Semitism at home and supplying the state of Israel with what it needs, when it needs it, without conditions to achieve total victory in the face of evil. For years, I have been a leading proponent and partner to President Trump in his historic support for Israeli independence and security, including moving the US Embassy to its rightful place in Jerusalem. And finally, President Trump's wise decision to call out UNRWA for what it is, a hive of anti-Semitism, and to eliminate every dollar of US funding.
That was Congresswoman Elise Stefanik representing the American people in Israel. And she is declaring that she will constantly serve as a stooge for the Israeli government. That was what that was all about. And Donald Trump has awarded her for doing so because she has just been named as the US ambassador to the United Nations. He decided to choose her for the role. What does it mean? What kind of power and influence will Elise Stefanik have on the United Nations? Something worth talking about. So look, UN ambassadors basically serve as the head of the US delegation to the United Nations, which is around 150 people. They represent the US on the UN Security Council. That's the area where Elise Stefanik will have the greatest power, because all it would take is for the United States to exercise its veto power and essentially veto anything that the UN Security Council has agreed upon. Even if the vast majority of members in the UN Security Council agree on something, all it takes is for the US to veto it, and they get their way. They also attend all meetings of the UN General Assembly, and they're also tasked with keeping the State Department informed of all the goings on at the United Nations. Now, it's considered to be the second most important foreign policy position in the administration behind Secretary of State, but there are some limitations to this role as well. And as you saw in the cold open, Stefanik has extensively criticized both UNRWA, which is a UN humanitarian agency that provides humanitarian aid to Palestinians, and the United Nations itself. In October, for instance, Stefanik called for a complete reassessment of US funding of the United Nations in response to efforts by the Palestinian Authority to expel Israel from the UN for alleged war crimes and human rights abuses committed in Gaza and West Bank. And she's also the person who got Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard, to step down. Other Ivy League presidents stepped down as a result of the performative hearings that she called. And this is not great. This is not good. But I do want to revisit what the US ambassador to the UN under Biden did in her role. So you'll get a sense that nothing's going to fundamentally change when it comes to US aid toward Israel, regardless of what the government wants to do.
Well, this is similar to the conversation we had earlier in the show. I think that Joe Biden was horrific on Gaza, and so was his UN ambassador, and so was Nikki Haley under Donald Trump when she was the UN ambassador. But Trump is threatening to take it to a different level here, where it's going to be even worse than horrific. As we reported earlier, Smotrich is saying we're going to annex the West Bank. That is 3 million Palestinians. And so that would be the worst possible outcome. Now, Elise Stefanik going in there is one very clear sign. It's the most non-nuanced sign that anyone could ever give. Giant green light to Israel, and not blinking, permanent. Any war crime, we're gonna veto. We're gonna veto any condemnation of Israel. And on top of that, we'll start blaming the Palestinians for their own deaths. We'll blame them for how they forced us to steal their land. They forced us to kill them, and start blaming them for everything. That's who Elise Stefanik is. She's one of the least moral people in the entire country. She's like the heart of cruelty and evil when it comes to foreign policy and Israel. I don't think I could pick a worse pick than Elise Stefanik for this role. She's the one who demanded that American citizens be arrested if they criticized Israel on a college campus. And she said the deans should be fired if they allow anyone to protest Israel. She hates the idea of American democracy and freedom of speech. She will only serve Israel. America will not be first in the UN with Stefanik. Will be at best number 2. But Israel will be an overwhelming number 1. And Anna, this is very important. This is Miriam Adelson's first gift from Trump. Of course, she wanted Stefanik, and she's his second largest donor. Gave him $137 million. She's a hard right-wing lunatic supporter of Israel who wants them to annex almost all of the Palestinian land.
And they will.
And so Stefanik is put in to say, you will do what Miriam says and give Israel everything it wants.
And I want to be clear, okay, for any of the Trump supporters who have a problem with the US, funding Ukraine or funding any other war abroad, Elise Stefanik believes that there should be absolutely no limitations to the amount of your taxpayer money that should be sent to Israel. That is what she has said on record, your money. So something to keep in mind. But let's get to how elated Israel is over this appointment. In a statement on Monday, Israel's international spokesperson to the UN said the country's ambassador, Danny Danon, looks forward to working closely with Elise Stefanik on tackling malicious lies at the UN, or that the UN advanced by hostile nations, while staying unswervingly committed to truth and justice.
Oh, is that what we're calling Israel now?
Yeah, that is a laughable statement to say the least. And look, Linda Thomas Greenfield, who's the US ambassador to the UN under Biden, also has an awful record. So I want to be clear about that. She has vetoed on 3 separate occasions the UN Security Council's decision to demand a ceasefire in Gaza. All it takes is the US. All it takes is one veto. And not only did she veto it once, she did it 3 times. So again, it's incredibly frustrating because both political parties are completely captured by pro-Israel lobbies, and as a result, they carry out whatever is in the best interest of Israel, despite what it might do to Palestinians, or despite how against American citizens might be over those actions, right? And go ahead.
Yeah, I just build on something you said there. I think look, America First and Miriam Adelson are on a collision course.
They are, yeah.
And so because America First genuinely believes that America should come first, and you could disagree with the different policies they have in that regard, but they're not unclear about it. And Miriam Adelson is also super clear. Israel should come first. That's why she gave $137 million to Trump. That's why she got Stefanik as the pick. That's why Smotrich today, a far-right cabinet minister in Israel, is saying, oh, we're gonna start the plan to annex the West Bank. That's what Haaretz reported was Miriam Adelson's plan. So when they clash, I'm not saying it's gonna be a big spectacular clash, we don't know. And that's what's really interesting, right? But either America First will bow its head and say, okay, because Trump said so, Israel first, America second, okay? Or they will not bow their head. And then in which case, I know Miriam's not gonna bow her head, I know AIPAC's not gonna bow their head, and Netanyahu isn't. So if Netanyahu and America First clash, that is going to be one for the ages.
I am curious to see how that plays out. Now, Dave Smith, who's a libertarian and has been very vocal against what Israel's been doing against the Palestinians, endorsed Donald Trump pretty close to the election, and he had something to say about some of the appointments that we've been seeing from Trump for his cabinet. And here's what he had to say about it. There's a lot of talk about the coming appointments. After the excellent decision to box out Mike Pompeo and Nikki Haley, Trump followed up with a horrible UN pick. We need to keep the pressure going. And then he says some stuff that I don't agree with. So for instance, he says, here's how Trump could really set up a heroic second term that is America first and would have a fighting shot at draining the swamp. He thinks that Rand Paul should be Secretary of State. I've also heard Vivek floated, that Vivek Ramaswamy was floated, and that would also be great.
Be careful what you wish for with Vivek. I think he's also 100% pro Netanyahu.
Also, I would just ask Dave Smith to look into Tulsi Gabbard a little more closely, because Tulsi Gabbard has done a good job branding herself as an anti-war individual, but in reality, all you need to do is a little bit of digging. She was pro-torture. She says that she's against regime change wars, but she was fully on board with the war on terror. And she has been very much on the side of Israel in regard to the actions that they've taken against the Palestinian people, both in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, I mean, Dave's usually really smart on this issue and many other issues, and I respect him, but I think you're almost certainly wrong about Vivek, but you're definitely wrong about Tulsi.
Yes.
So if you put her as Secretary of Defense, be careful what you wish for, because she's totally on Netanyahu's side.
And look, it's also unsurprising that Trump would pick Elise Stefanik. Yes, Miriam Adelson favored Stefanik for this role, but on top of that, Stefanik did what Trump loves the most. She kissed his ass endlessly, and she was rewarded for it. And so for those who are willing to serve as like Trump's lackeys, individuals who will, aid and abet what he wants to do, they usually get rewarded. But be careful what you wish for. Nikki Haley had that role, and it didn't end up working out so well for her. So.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.